name is Latha Poonamallee. I'm the chair of the Faculty of Management at the New School and created this Management and Social Justice Conversation series. And it's my great pleasure to invite and welcome all of you to the last event of the series. So it's been 1 year. This was supposed to have been a 2-day conference in May 2020. And due to the pandemic, we had to pivot and we made it into a year-long conversation, which was very fortuitous because it turned out that meant it became affordable. We didn't have to charge anybody to present. We didn't have to charge anybody to attend. And we can have everybody from all over the world join us. And so this has been a wonderful and restorative event and process for me to be involved, especially in the pandemic here, holding this space for discussing a very provocative and, while some people could argue, oxymoron, which is, can actually management be just? Can management and organizations be facilitators for justice and equity? And what we have found is that there are great many examples of experiments, both in the mainstream and in the margins, both in the US as well as in all over the world, of people really interested in these questions, trying different things. And that's actually very hopeful in this year. And so we are continuing the second year series, which will start in the academic year. The first event is the Thursday after Labor Day. And what we have done is that, we have scheduled always like first Thursdays and third Wednesdays. So please, you're prepared to attend the series. And we've had rolling deadlines for participation proposals. So the last proposal deadline is August 10th. So for probably like spring semester. So please submit. It can be an academic or a scholarly paper. It could be a teaching demonstration or workshops that have been like so popular in our series. And it can also be practice panels involving practitioners. So we really want to create this space as a space that brings together people, both organizations, people, practitioners, academics, and activists who are interested in these questions and struggling with them and wrestling with them and experimenting and innovating and thinking about it very deeply. And so this has been an amazing experience. Like I said, it's a personal privilege for me. And I'm also very happy to announce that, Palgrave Macmillan just accepted a proposal to publish an edited volume on management and social justice that I will be co-editing with a couple of colleagues from other institutions. And so if you have an idea for a book chapter, and if you've already submitted to the conference, next year's conference, I will definitely be considering them. Please, look up the proposal, call for proposals, and we'll also share it with you again and submit something. I look forward to that. And this particular event is like especially close to my heart because I have people very close to my heart on the panel. Ram and Carter, who are my dear friends and colleagues, and I have students from past and present semesters who are participating in this. So I want to now hand this over next to Ram, who would be leading us through meditation practice.
Thank you, Latha, for inviting and organizing a very exciting event. The whole year, what you've done has been of importance for not only for the community, for the global issues we are facing right now with COVID. And thanks for Carter for inviting me to be part of this exciting panel. So I'm going to lead just a 3-minute short meditation. Is that okay, Latha? That's okay. All right. So people who have been meditating should be okay. And for people who haven't, then it's going to be a breath meditation, but we're going to focus on the collective aspect of what we do. Close your eyes and take 3, 4 deep breaths as you settle in. rest your attention on your breath. Now think of all the people practicing with us right now. Breathe in, breathe, when you breathe in, imagine you are breathing in all the compassion from everyone present here. When you breathe out all your worries and fears you're experiencing right now, end of the semester, other deadlines you have. Just let them go with your out breath. Breathe in the compassion from everyone here with us. Breathe out your worries and fears, all the list of things to do right now from distracting you from your breath now. When you are distracted, gently come back to your breath. Be kind to yourself. That's very important to be kind to yourself when you do meditation. Open your eyes when you're ready. Thanks for practicing with me.
Thank you, Ram, for the wonderful practice. It's a great way to start this session. And we can start with a quick introduction, self-introduction by the panelists. Who are you, and what is your experience with mindfulness and meditation practices? Ram, do you want to go first?
Okay, my name is Ram Mahalingam. I'm professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. I'm also director for the Bharatiya Leadership Institute at Michigan, University of Michigan. Um, my journey is a little bit complex. I was learning meditation for a very practical purpose when I was in college. I used to have a lot of test anxiety, like many Asians do, because tests make a difference in our life. So I learned meditation to really help me to do well, because I used to not do well in tests, despite my hard preparation. So that's how I started. But at the same time, I was also very involved in the social justice movement at that time in my college days. But the social justice group doesn't want to talk to the meditation community. The meditation community is primarily from privileged upper caste teachers. So the community really focus on the self enhancement tool, how to use meditation for self enhancement or enhancing yourself. So the beyond my the Mac mindfulness issue, I actually faced it about decades ago in my college days. So I didn't know how to integrate them. It took a while for me to integrate my social justice work and my practice in mindfulness over time. So for a long time, I didn't talk to the social justice folks about mindfulness. And the mindfulness folks, I don't talk about social justice. So I was more a closeted meditator for a long time. So it took a while for me to come out to integrate them. And Latha has given opportunity to talk about that work, what I do and what I teach right now.
Thank you, Ram. And like Ram mentioned, I think we share a kind of a similar cultural background. We're both from South Asia, in fact, both from the same part of the country. And I think for me, it was not just anxiety as much as, I was very much like an emotional late bloomer. I was very emotionally unintelligent. And so I've been practicing mindfulness for a very long time. And only in the last 10 years, I have started to integrate mindfulness in my professional practice. I started using it in leadership development with the focus to have more expansive mindsets and mental models where people are defining themselves in a different way. Because one thing that almost all contemplative traditions really are grounded in is that we are not separate. That there is a shared kind of experience, and so that we are not separate. And so for me, that became a very crucial way in which to build in mindfulness in making the world a little bit better, where people, so in the same way as Ram mentioned that, I say that do not look away from suffering. A lot of the mainstream mindfulness practice is about actually kind of looking away from suffering, because it's about just feeling better for yourself. And I use mindfulness very differently, as some of my students here will talk about, is that I say, look at the suffering, do not look away from suffering, and see how it feels, how it sits. Because to be a good leader, even if you have not come from a position of marginality, as Ram and I may have come from, but for people to have a moral imagination to actually put yourself in somebody's suffering and see how you sit with it is very crucial. So that's kind of how I come to using mindfulness in the social justice space, of really using it from a social perspective, from a accountability and responsibility perspective, and also building resilience, because these are difficult times and difficult situations for people to be looking at this suffering is difficult too. And then especially looking at suffering if you are a person of privilege is even more difficult, because it is always associated with some kind of a guilt, or at least, I want to look away. I don't want to look at this, a discomfort. And so resilience also becomes really crucial. So I look at it from both a kind of a personal and also a structural systemic perspective, using identities and mental models. So thank you very much. And Carter.
Hi, thank you, Latha, for having us today and for organizing. Indeed, I think I approached it also from a very personal perspective. I have a background in theater, and it took me a while to kind of put this together, but there's a lot in theater practice and collaborating that has to do with being grounded and being in the present. And the fact that we would do warm-ups all the time at the beginning of class. I never equated that type of movement-based activity with a mindfulness or contemplative practice until much later. So my personal practice emerged out of that type of work. And it wasn't really until 7 or 8 years ago that I started to notice through a personal practice that it was having some effect on how I was teaching. And it was having an effect on how I showed up in the classroom, how I listened, and how I engaged with students differently. And now with Latha and the University Fellowship and in my own work as a designer and a design educator, I'm really interested in this sort of intersection between design practice, pedagogy, creativity, and mindfulness. And in particular, how, oh, we lost my ear. And in particular, how these things can inform one another so that as we're educating designers to recognize their interdependence with one another and the impact that their work has on others. So by channeling sort of the empathy that can come from contemplative practice, but also what that means for the environment and for the world that we share. So that's where my curiosity lies right now, is in seeing how these different practices can help make more socially and environmentally just designers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carter. Jamie, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm one of Latha's students. I'm also one of Carter's students too. So that's ironic. I got started with mindfulness because I had gotten this job as the executive director of a theater company that had mindfulness as part of its mission. And then I enrolled in Latha's class, and because it was mindfulness and leadership. And I was completely transformed by her way of doing things and her way of looking at mindfulness and seeing exactly what she said earlier, that it's about not just about like, you know, everything's great and, you know, that sort of like toxic positivity, that there is value in suffering, that we should feel the suffering, that we should, you know, understand that those things happen. And so now I started my own nonprofit that is basically a youth education nonprofit that also uses mindfulness as part of our mission. But I'm focusing on sort of what Carter said, which is the creative process and how mindfulness ties into that. And one of the ways is it creates, it helps facilitate divergent thinking, allowing, you know, those mindfulness, the mindful meditation practices help encourage divergent thinking. And there have been a lot of studies on this, that people have more ideas after they meditate, because it sort of like gives the mind a break. And part of the creative process involves taking a break and allowing ideas to percolate without realizing it. In addition, you know, we provide free programming and we're hoping to make it as high quality as possible, but that mindfulness is tied into our classes. And it could be applied to any discipline. For example, we do a coding class with kids where they meditate before they come up with ideas for what they're going to code for their video games. And in addition, we teach them about resilience because that's one of our values. So mindfulness also ties into resilience, like she mentioned, and that also ties into social justice. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. And that's basically the gist of it.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. Pernilla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Pernilla, and I had the honor of taking a class with both Latha and Carter last year, and I was able to follow up and take mindfulness with leadership. And I studied strategic design and management. So I was very curious. I started from a personal perspective to learn more of mindfulness and how it can help me in my own personal behavior, how it can help me with facilitate relationship, become a better listener. But what really got me interested is how we can use it on a collective scale, how we can implement it strategically within different teams, within different organizations and actual structures, and how we can use it to leverage collaborative work. And, you know, as we've been talking about creativity and the space of applying empathy into the whole process of creating and thinking. And it's something that has changed how I tackle any task that I do today. And it's also changed how I have relationships with different teams and different people that I collaborate with. So it's been an amazing journey, and I'm very excited to be part of this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Purnila. Genesis, do you want to go next? And then we can have Vicky.
Hi, everyone. I'm Genesis. I use they, them pronouns. I am in the Environmental Policy Sustainability Management graduate program. And I am connected to Latha because I was a student of hers last year, taking the mindfulness leadership course. And it was super, super impactful for me in my work. I'm a community organizer in the environmental and climate justice movement. I currently work with young people, Black and Brown young people at a public school in Washington Heights on an environmental justice initiative. And I guess like my connection to mindfulness was kind of just started at a very, I guess the inception of like who I am, being like a person of color and a non-binary person at that. Just sitting with myself and really understanding like my body and who I am and how I'm genderedized and racialized, I guess, in community and in other spaces. And I think why I enjoyed so much Latha's class is that I don't sometimes like sitting with my thoughts or understanding like what's happening, because when you're an organizer, you're really at the service of others and really trying to be that like facilitator role, and you're not always really thinking about your own health and well-being. And so I think since taking Latha's course, I've really have incorporated more mindfulness practices, especially now during a pandemic where, you know, community organizing has really shifted in terms of like how we connect and build with other people in social movements. And so I think, yeah, like incorporating mindfulness has now more than ever has really helped me connect differently with not only the young people I'm working with, but also the rest of my community. And really understanding that it's a collective practice. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Genesis. Vicky?
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Vicky Oliver. I have written 6 self-help books for the stressed out corporate professional and 2 novels under a pen name. And I'm a newbie when it comes to mindfulness. I discovered it basically in Latha's class this term. And what I really found valuable is that I run a coaching practice and I'm trying to help other people manage their lives. And in order to do that, I really have to manage myself better. I have to manage my own emotions. I have to self-manage. And by becoming aware of that and meditating and also journaling every day, which is a practice that I did years ago and then dropped it, but then started doing it in Latha's class, I found those practices to be just so helpful, both in terms of my own self-management and then in terms of being a better listener. So I've gained a huge amount, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the journey. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Vicky. All right, thank you very much, everybody, for the introduction and orientation towards where we are. And in the next few minutes, Carter and I are going to talk a little bit about our collaboration and the mindfulness effort at the new school. Carter?
Yeah, thanks, Latha. And it's great to hear all the backgrounds of the students some of whom I have yet to meet. So thanks for sharing. I started by, kind of my mindfulness journey at the new school through offering faculty development workshops. And out of those faculty development workshops, we developed a real great, strong sense of community. So the faculty development workshops were really centered around contemplative pedagogy, what it looks like to engage with contemplative practices as part of your teaching practice. I think Vicky mentioned this notion of sort of self-care and self-management to regulate your own emotions when you show up into the classroom, which can oftentimes, now more than ever, be a really charged place. And so the way in which we show up can be impacted by the types of practices that we do outside of the classroom. So not only that, but also looking at what can we do in a classroom to engage with our students differently and to really start educating the whole person, that we're not just delivering skills and information, but that we're looking at the whole spectrum of what it means to be a student and what it means to be in our classes. This was a very self-selecting group of folks who would show up. But I think the amazing part of these groups was that they were made up from graduate students, staff, and faculty. So it was a great way that we came together around this topic and met quite regularly. I see some folks here who have been to some of those events before, met quite regularly in person, kind of pre-COVID. I think it's a statement to sort of the busyness and the anxiety and tension of where we're at in this particular moment, that we have not been meeting as much, even though this is probably the time when it's important to meet now more than ever. So through that mentorship and through those connections with the provost office doing that type of faculty development, we were able to get some research grants that connected Latha, myself, and one of our former colleagues, Doris Chang, who was at NSSR, New School for Social Research in psychology. And that enabled us to begin to form a community, which eventually led to the university fellowship, which Latha and I share, where we're exploring mindfulness and contemplative practice across the university, specifically thinking about the interdisciplinarity of our institution in particular, but how contemplative practice and mindfulness can foster interdisciplinarity.
Yes, and to kind of build on, Carter's background on the new school, what we call the mindfulness of the new school. The new school selected the two of us among another handful of people as university fellows, and that kind of gave us like a structure and space for us. I think Carter has been my one constant in the last 2 years. 2 years, I think. We've met almost once a week during this period to talk more about our practice, to experiment more. And we also started building what we called a mindfulness map at the new school. And our goal was obviously, like, as an artist and designer, Carter was like, we should have like a physicality of a kind of a map of like the different activities on mindfulness that's going around campus, because there are different faculty that use kind of mindfulness or contemplative practice influence teaching practices in different spaces. And we have a number of students and alumni who do use this. And so we actually started interviewing different people who are affiliated with the new school as alumni, faculty, part-time, full-time students, and how do they use this, and how is it, as Carter mentioned, like, how do we view this as an interdisciplinary kind of methodology or a tool and a framework. And so we started doing that, and then I had already been teaching this mindfulness and leadership for 10 years for both in class, but also in other organizational settings. And so yes, we did that, and then Carter and I built this really it's like a buffet or a survey class on mindfulness and contemplative engagement, which brings together multiple kind of disciplines, like, based on our own interest and areas of expertise and research. So I do three modules on social justice and relationship with the natural environment and leadership, and Carter does design, creativity, and a sense of place attachment. And so that was like a very interesting experience, because again, like, it drew a bunch of people from across the campus, from undergraduate to PhD students, and and we actually, are presenting we presented a paper in an architecture conference. I would have never gone to an architecture conference if I had not collaborated with Carter about using mindfulness and contemplative pedagogy for interdisciplinary collaborative work. And so we are still kind of doing a lot of deep dive in the data, which is very interesting. And I'm also, I'm launching a new class in fall, which I'm super excited, which is mindfulness and sacred ecologies, but we're using immersive technologies like the AR and VR with 3D cameras and stuff like that, to kind of explore some socio-ecological histories of what is kind of considered to be sacred in general knowledge, but also develop some understanding and share what is personally meaningful and sacred to me. And because I've been doing that work, like Ram mentioned, that, the social justice, leftist, Marxist way of thinking is never really kind of shook hands with mindfulness, because it is being relegated as a spirituality tradition. And so quite a while ago, I wrote a paper called Reclaiming Sacredness as a kind of a source of generative capacity. And which is doesn't have to be religious, but whatever is sacred to a community, an organization, a person, and the personal meaning. So I'm kind of going back to that to build this class in fall. And I'm so very excited about the class coming up. And Carter will talk a little bit more about other things that we are planning from this fellowship, and how to build on what we have done so far, and the capacities at the new school to help all stakeholders and extended community.
Sure. One of the things, I think it was scheduled for maybe March 14th, a very inauspicious date in 2020 here in New York City. But we had planned to connect with a number of different folks who were looking at mindfulness and contemplative engagement from across schools in the region at a roundtable. So unfortunately that didn't happen, but I do want to credit Rhonda Schiller from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, who has been doing a lot of really great work. So if this is something you're interested in, particularly from the design standpoint, they have a pretty robust group of folks at Pratt who are looking into this. And the idea for the map in their case was about physical places, like where on campus could you go to get away and to kind of find some peace. And we have spaces like that at the new school as well. And so that's really the hope, is that this community that we engage with on the local level can be expanded a little bit more broadly. And hopefully in the fall, when we are more together, not in screen form, we'll be able to reignite some of those goals and to also share that collaboratively across our university, but also across other institutions as well. So hopefully if anyone's on this call who has interest in joining and being part of that, that would be great. We're also, I don't think you mentioned the minor, Latha, did you? I can't remember. Yeah. No, so the next step in the immediate future is to create a graduate minor at our institution, which will allow students to take courses across the curriculum that we've identified. There's a lot of amazing faculty doing work in all different types of facets related to contemplative engagement, both from a practical standpoint, from the psychology perspective, but also from understanding traditional roots of these practices. So we look forward to being able to launch that graduate minor very soon, giving students and enabling students to chart their own course in understanding mindfulness at the new school. Would you like me to move on to the next section, Latha? Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Okay, so we'll turn a little bit more specifically to the relationship between mindfulness and social justice, which has come up in a lot of different ways in the last few moments. Um, Often this presumption of mindfulness practice is a very personal and self-reflective one. In fact, that was my entry point into this work. But even as we see in those Time magazine covers on the marketing materials for these events, the practice of mindfulness has all too often been framed within the genre specifically of self-help. If I meditate, I can be more productive. I can be a better contributor to the capitalist hamster wheel. But a key component of mindfulness practice that's all too overlooked in our Western and secular context is its interpersonal, and I would also say interspecies dynamic. So indeed, it's through mindfulness practice that we're able to connect ourselves to a larger humanity and the more than human world. And by seeing ourselves as part of this deeply interconnected world, we might be able to better understand our privileges in that world and the agency in which we have to make change. So this isn't necessarily to undermine the very valuable aspect of mindful and contemplative practice that can provide the necessary self-reflective posture and self-care needed to look at difficult things and do difficult work. But thinking about mindfulness from a social standpoint allows us to frame these practices in a way that we can serve others and the ecological systems in which we depend, and identify the ways in which they're intrinsically linked. So in this section now, we'll hear directly from Ram and Latha. And as you learned in the bio, one of the focuses of Ram's work is dignity. So I'd like to ask Ram to share a little bit more about the connection between mindfulness, contemplative practice, and instilling dignity in others and seeing dignity in others.
Thanks, Carter. As I mentioned, it's been a long journey. When I was in college, I got the Kundalini meditation teacher. I got the certificate, but working through these questions over a long time is a journey. I study sanitation workers in India, US, South Korea, Japan, and France. So I've been studying cleaners, and I was a janitor when I came to this country. I worked as a janitor, so I know what it takes to do the work in a campus. So my focus in mindfulness also expanded because I wanted to bring the Buddhist notion, but also social justice focus into the mindfulness framework, which I call mindful mindset. That is, it has features from Buddhism, traditional mindfulness, what I call it, or classical mindfulness, and the social justice part I integrate. So I have 7 features: compassion, sympathetic joy, situated intersectional awareness, to what extent we think about our privileges in relation to our context, cultural humility, generosity, wonder, and negative capability. So negative capability is a notion came from my work in humanities. It's Keats developed this notion. He called, as an artist, you should not afraid of pursuing something that is difficult for you to pursue. So he's a romantic poet. So romanticists always wrote about something beautiful all the time. He asked, what if life is not really so beautiful around you? How, as an artist, do you engage with things that are uncomfortable to you, with honesty, without irritation, and you engage with the present? And so it's a very big topic within arts and training of actors. Actors need to have negative capability because it's a sublime form of compassion. So that's important. So I use this framework to really teach students how you need to really cultivate all these things to think about your relationship to others, relationship to your connectedness to both to your own emotions, which mostly the self-help focus is on. How do you connect your own emotions, regulate them, which is good, which is a good thing to do, and how to use it to interconnectedness, how you connect to people who are different from us, and how you're going to do that, and to larger ecological interconnectedness, how you connect to the larger world. These are the 3 levels of interconnectedness. With this framework, I'm really looking at the issue of dignity. So dignity is important because I study communities that normally don't get the dignity. You get a lot of power and privilege when you're a teacher or a doctor or an engineer, but people don't pay attention when you say I'm a janitor. So invisibility in workplace is a big thing. That's the most common thing in all across countries. It manifests in different forms. Constantly, these workers have to negotiate um, the dignity injuries they experience, the invisibilities they experience. So I really talk about three different kinds of dignity. One is personal dignity, your sense of who you are, self-worth, everything is invested. Then I call the intersubjective dignity, how you notice the dignity of other people in the everyday context. And the processual dignity, that the extent to which you commit to a dignity culture around you. So you're not a bystander, you are actually actively involved in preserving dignity of yourself and other people. So I use this framework to really help students to, I teach two courses, one on mindful leadership and creativity. Other one is mindfulness and engaged living, how you actually develop a vision to preserve dignity of other people. The way I define dignity is, dignity has been studied by different groups in different ways. Dignity is studied as, among nursing, it's a big topic, how you treat the patient with dignity. Among human rights lawyers, how the human rights aspect of dignity. Then philosophers discuss about dignity, what it is, they're getting into the questions of different aspects of how to define dignity. So I just simply, I see this as a dynamic concept, as it's an embodied praxis. So you actually engage, how you intervene with dignity, with your own dignity. So it's actively you're engaging with the present, but you also with a commitment to preserve dignity of yourself, others, and the culture, and how to develop a vision. So I help students develop a vision. They actually do a final project, an art project about these three kinds of dignity. And the take-home message is how they're going to develop a vision to go for it. In my research, I actually study dignity violations, how organizations can actually pay attention to this, how to prevent them, what are the ways we can actually promote dignity in workplace. I study in hospital setting, how patients are mistreated, especially if you're a women or ethnic minorities, how different marginalized identities affect the way you are treated in hospital, how it affects patient experience, how it affects the sense of agency, and how to really promote dignity in that setting. It's another area I study. These are the two areas. And I also study women engineers. When they work predominantly male-dominated culture, how that particular setting also perpetuates certain kinds of dignity injuries, and it really affects, undermines their motivation to um, engage with their career, find meaning in their work. So it kind of reproduces inequalities in workplace, especially in the profession of STEM fields, and how it happens. That's a way to look at it. As a director of Bharati Leadership Institute, I actually established a mindful leader program where we actually train students when they teach. They also, when they lead as a profession, do all the activities for the center, how to lead it mindfully. This is so the mindfulness practices, the mindful mindset, all the framework has been integrated. Dignity is a very important part of how they think about this question. I also developed a mindful peace leadership program where I take students to Hiroshima to really talk about how we are living in a world where peace is not being part of our consciousness at all. So the students meet the A-bomb survivors, Ibakshas, and they talk about their story. They exchange narratives about their life, how that affects students, and students spend last 3 days in a Zen temple, doing a silent retreat to really reflect on their commitment to peace when they come back and they talk about these experiences. So this is how I actually integrate mindfulness and dignity. So the reason, the connection between mindfulness and dignity is I really tell my students, if you become mindful, my litmus test is how you treat other people with dignity. It becomes a very bottom line. So it becomes an ethical imperative, how you actually carry on yourself in your everyday life, how you interact in your community. It's not the moment to just the moment to moment awareness, which is important. With a commitment to dignity is an important piece. The ethical imperative has to be added. And that's where dignity provides a very important tool to, conceptual tool for us to anchor the social justice and integrate this with mindfulness. Thank you, Carter.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. And Latha's work also reveals aspects of dignity and self in terms of thinking about our own identity by looking at different mental models, and how this sort of self-reflective practice can help us to understand where we see ourselves in relation to others and larger issues. So Latha can share a little bit about the work with identity and mental models.
Thank you, Carter. So I've been doing, as a person that is trained in organizational behavior, I have this freedom not to commit to one level of analysis. A sociologist committed to the social system, a psychologist committed to the individual system. So I feel like I'm always in between, moving between the levels, and I've actually written about moving between the levels. And but that also means, like, I look at organizations with a lot of cynicism, that I think when you bring people together in an organizational system, that I think it is embedded with potential challenges in terms of power and hierarchy and issues that access to resources and historic legacies and geography, where you're born, all those things. But at the individual level, I'm actually much more of an optimist. So I kind of co-inhabit both these spaces of, that I feel like that at the organizational level, the governance has to be very intentional. Otherwise, it's very easy. Like, we have seen cases where like unions can become the bottleneck for actually positive change. If you take, for example, the police unions, right? Because unions are traditionally, they're great, they're wonderful, they're solidarity institutions that provide. But at the same time, sometimes, like depending on the history and who the players are, the institutions, organizations, even they are supposed to be progressive and solidarity oriented, can slip into sometimes reification and maintenance of the similar hierarchy in certain ways. And but I think at the individual level, I'm actually a lot more hopeful that individuals, because I do believe in the individual's power of agency to make a choice, that we are definitely inhabiting both, because in the one thing that, as someone that has been doing the mindfulness practice, and I come to it from also a historic family legacy, like I learned to do mindfulness as a girl with my father. So, is that we are not different, right? It's like we are not separate, we are not different. There is so much that at the same time, we within us contain everything. We contain the ignoble, the propensity for violence and cruelty, and that is as much human as for nobility and magnanimity and generosity and all the positive things. So I really genuinely believe that, so when I've been looking at this work on mental models and identities, and I started looking more into, morality, moral development, the type of work, and like Kohlberg's type of work. And for me, what I found more and more, I did a conceptual paper like a few years ago. And so that's kind of continued to guide me in parsing this in both my research, teaching, and practice, is that if we understand the moral development as a linear process, that means like I give up one to go to the next one. And that doesn't work like that. We are kind of, human beings are very complex and very willful. And so, and this definitely, so one of the ways in which I conceptualize these identity systems that kind of has associated mental models, or is that I've looked at it as 4 different systems. I used to think of it as 3 until a year and a half or 2 back, and then I started adding more complexity to this model. So you have a kind of a personal self, which is like at the individual level, that is egocentric or a very transactional model. Say, for instance, like, I have a job contract with the new school, and what am I expected to do for the job contract? And, what are my responsibilities for it? And what am I paid for it? And what are my responsibilities towards my students, my community, my, colleagues? And so that is kind of like a very much like a, transactional space. And then you have what I call the interpersonal self, like how do I show up in interpersonal relationships? If that's kind of my core identity, what does it look like? And then I have, developed another notion of what I call the tribal self, which is a lot of the positive organizational psychology and positive organizational studies fall into this in my, trying to put all these things together, is that tribal is like, like for instance, like a new school identity. It doesn't have to be obviously your geography and history, but it's also shared interests and kinship and things like that. So the tribal identity kind of tells you where you are tied to. And then, the fourth one I call is the universal self, which is interdependent centric or transcendental, which is kind of like, where we see ourselves as part of the universe and we define ourselves as part of the universe, and which includes not just fellow human beings, but all of the universe. And the difference that I propose in this is that it is not like we inhabit one or the other, but we inhabit all of them, and one or the other assumes primacy at different points of time in different contexts. That's what makes human beings complex, that, sometimes you think like, oh, this person did this. It's like, it's very difficult to reconcile those things. And I've argued that for these different identities also have different mental models, which is like, how do we engage with others? How do we engage with the world is determined by how we view ourselves. And I've also talked a little bit more about in my most recent book that's actually just coming out, is
You froze on us.
Yeah, I think it's Latha's internet, and we'll give her a moment to see if she unfreezes. It's a moment, we talk about doing a pause in our classes, and Zoom has allowed us to kind of take a pause.
Yes.
Latha, we lost you for a moment, so we were just taking a moment.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I don't know where I stopped, but so identities and mental models go together, and there is a movement, and neuroscience talks about also the top-down and bottom-up movements. And bottom-up is more emotional and affective. Top-down is more cognitive restructuring that are more permanent. And I find that mindfulness practice really does help, especially when done in a socially mindful, not turning away from the suffering perspective. It really helps us be more expansive in how we define ourselves, be more expansive in how we engage with the world, because being expansive morally means it gives us also the ability to be more generous and more magnanimous and less transactional and less unidimensional in terms of economic kind of a social exchange theory model. So that's kind of how I come to the, looking at one's own relationship, but in a systemic and structural way. So thank you.
Thanks, Latha. And I think both of the sort of topics that you bring up can help with perhaps this next question. This theme of kind of dismantling mindfulness as a revolution, the McMindfulness that we've seen in Western secular society. So these practices have deep roots in cultures around the world and have been appropriated by lots of different groups for capitalist benefits. As I had mentioned earlier, this kind of idea of productivity. And so I'd love to hear, and I think all of us would be interested to know what you think of this appropriation of mindfulness and traditional knowledge as really being of service in a lot of ways to white supremacy and to capitalism.
Is that question for me or Ram? Ram?
Both of you, yeah.
Sure. Okay. I think that's Latha, you want to go first, or
You can go first, Ram.
all right. I think that's a really a genuine concern. How we are doing that. I think the appropriation is also an interesting word, because there is no one Buddhism. There is no one mindfulness. Mindfulness has also evolved over time. Engage mindfulness. Baba Sahib Ambedkar started when he was converting Dalits to Buddhism to get out of the system that continuously oppressed them. So we have a long history, and different cultures have appropriated a different way or adapted it to their um, own setting. But I think what is important is to the crucial question is whose interest does it serve? That's a good question, and how it is affecting. Without talking about greed and capitalism, can we talk about mindfulness? And rarely you see these terms used within the discussion about mindfulness. Most of the time, mindfulness is pitched as sort of a more self-enhancement tool, which is very good. But at the same time, does it really, whose interest does it serve? It's a very interesting work Paul Heelas did long back, looking at the New Age movement. He's an anthropologist, and Heelas' work, he looked at um, transcendental meditation, other different kind of meditation practices. What he found was people who, some of the executives who were trained in meditation practices, become more egocentric after the practice. So his argument was, you just adapt something like this without really providing an ethical, other moral framework. This is what's going to happen. They are very efficient, right? And at the same time, is it to what extent this is helping the communities, or how their action is um, causing suffering. So they're looking at the relation between suffering and self. But most of the time, suffering, my own suffering, how I'm dealing with it, that's what a lot of the self-help focused mindfulness does. But at the same time, like Latha said, how my actions also cause suffering to other people, how to think about that, right? That's always a difficult question, even within the, different Zen tradition. This question is an important question. I think that's bringing back the responsibility of what we have to ourselves, to the communities, and to the larger world. I think we can recapture certain essence of mindfulness and providing an ethical framework that makes us more responsible. Without that, I think the criticism that it is just serving the interest or it is becoming another efficiency promoting tool. You become more efficient, you write more papers, you publish more papers, you go to, that sort of thing. Is it whose interest does it serve? Or you make more money. So a lot of times mindfulness is even shown how it is improving productivity. That's the kind of, is that the pitch always we should do, we should keep? And what are the consequences? And I think that piece has to be, different people have addressed differently. Latha has a take, you have a take, I have a take. I think this is a kind of a collective responsibility we have to really take this beyond mindfulness. What are the things we can actually do, and how to use this to make a better world, but at the same time be cognizant of how this could be appropriated. And it's an ongoing struggle. It's a relay. I always tell them it's a relay race. You keep on passing the baton, and how we should use this to really think about the ways improve the efficiency and efficacy of passing the baton and making the change. Latha,
Yes,
I'm done.
I think, Rama said it all. And so I completely agree that, one of the things that when Carter and I were doing these interviews with different people, and some people talked about how they were concerned with, especially if they were, white people practicing mindfulness, and we were interviewing them. And several people actually mentioned that they're concerned that they don't want to be seen as appropriating and things like that. And and so I always say that the fact that you're thinking about appropriation means then you're being actually thoughtful about it, and you're examining that in a reflective way. So that's obviously definitely one step better. And the other piece is that I actually, published some research on appropriation of traditional knowledge, but in the biospace. And it's a really tricky one, right? Because these were, as Ram mentioned, and for thousands of years in different communities, these were created as commons. It is for everybody. So I would, as much as sometimes joke that I will die a happy woman if I never have to hear another white, blonde, thin woman saying namaste to me. But that is just more my reactive experience, right? But I really do think that I believe that this belongs to the commons. That means like everybody has equal access to it. Everybody should be able to use it. It's owned by all of us. It is developed for millennia by communities across the world in different ways for the collective. However, tying it back to my identities model, right? One of the pieces that are crucial in my identities model is actually boundary management between these different levels. Because what happens is when some of the more benevolent mental models, which are focused on the commons and the collective, conflict or clash with the exploitative or a tribal or even an ego-centered mental models, right? For instance, like, I've written, like I said, about biopiracy, that pharmaceutical companies routinely send people to indigenous and the global south countries where there are like a lot of knowledge about different kinds of pharmacological solutions, herbs and things like that. And then they isolate it. And there'll be like some huge cases about, legal case lawsuits about these things. And that's when the problem is, right? Because this was collectively developed for everybody's use. But then who's actually capitalizing it? Who's commercializing it? And who profits off it? And so one of the challenges is that I've studied some of the indigenous tribes in Southern Africa and also in Southern India that have gotten into some kind of a profit sharing arrangement. And that was not the intention of the invention, right? However, this is the closest to some amount of justice that they can get, because otherwise, like, they would get nothing and Pfizer would be making the money. I mean, in the current climate, I'm not dissing Pfizer. I'm very happy I got the Pfizer vaccine. But what I'm saying is that is the real problem. When the boundary management, right? Because when you're in a very benevolent norms as your mental models, then you don't really set up boundaries. And similarly, I think with this is I genuinely believe that this was collectively developed for the commons and everybody has access to it. However, there's definitely potential for exploitation. And when it is removed from communal and moral imperatives and context, because these were again developed by communal, kind of resources and innovation. It was not one person's innovation. It was a communal resource. And when you remove, and I think some authors refer to as spiritual bypass, when you remove it from the spirituality or the spiritual roots and the communal context and the moral context, then it can become a real nexus of white supremacy, capitalism, and exploitation, because then, Google can have like a huge mindfulness initiative all over the country without really changing anything structurally or, questioning the aspects of bias in algorithms or, not questioning the environmental impacts of their cloud business, right? So, but what's the point of running mindfulness classes for all your employees, but if you as a collective are not reflecting on your own role and impact on the world? And I'm a tech entrepreneur myself, so I'm not like, a person that's opposed to tech or anything, but I'm just saying that like in any organizational context, this question of like, how are we colonizing? How are we capitalizing? This is an important question for pretty much everything. And so this is definitely in the collective. And even like, I think, as Carter mentioned, the two covers, the Time magazine covers that talk about the mindfulness revolution, they're separated by 10 years. So it is not as if in 10 years, nobody thought about like, why are we putting another white blonde thin chick on the cover of a magazine talking about mindfulness and meditation right? That was never asked. And so that was like 10 years period to reflect on. So it's not like, oh, it came last year and this year, and let's learn a little bit more next year, maybe different. So there's 10-year separation, and you still have this. So there is definitely that impetus, and there is the, potential for it to be completely silencing. On the one hand, silencing dissent, kind of keeping people happy without questioning, and appropriating and capitalizing a communal resource, in a very capitalistic way. So absolutely, that's a great question. So thank you.
Yeah, and I am sort of conscious of the time that we have till 1:30 and want to make sure we get the next two little segments in. So Latha, I'll hand it over to you to talk more about the practice from the book, Expansive Leadership, Cultivating Mindfulness to Self-Lead and Others in a Changing World.
All right, so Cora just like plug my books if you want to look at it. I'm not like I'm not a very comfortable, like, let's just put me in the front person. So this was a nice way for me to sneak in and say I have a new book out. So I have, this book has like a lot of exercises in exploring these different identities, from an individual to structural to back, and really developing an understanding of who we are, but using mindfulness as the scaffolding framework. And so I'm going to just like really quickly share. Somebody said a book. Yes, we'll put a link. And if you're buying it on Amazon right now, it's actually if you're an ebook fan, buy it on Amazon. They have a 25% discount. If you like book in your hand, I will share the Byte and the publisher. I can give you a code for discount that they give me as an author. So you have a discount on that, So what we're going to do is I'm going to try one thing, because one of the things that I am like, my father, my late father always used to say that you cannot play tennis from both sides. And I always do. And which is why I always like the paradox aspect of like, life. And so, so one of the things I always think about is that, I think about it as a person from the global South and a woman who's raised in a very patriarchal culture. I also came from not a very affluent background. And so, so I think about always like, okay, what if I was born on the other side? Who would I have been, right? So that's like an important question when you're talking about trying to understand and trying to be a social activist. And so I'm going to just lead you through a little bit of, exercise that we'll do in breakout rooms. I want you to think about either a core identity or a core relationship that you have that defines you, right? Which means like it could be a relationship with a person, like I'm a parent. And that's like really important, because that's something that I made very deliberately. I was born to my parents, but I chose to become a parent. So that's a very important identity for me. And, or it could be that, you belong to an organization, or you belong to a profession, or it could be some other core identity that you have because of your ethnicity, race, or gender, or, sexual orientation, or whatever. And for a lot of us, I think some of the core identity is actually driven by marginality, interestingly, where we feel marginalized. That becomes a very core identity for us, even if it's not explicitly core. And like Ram was in the closet meditator. so sometimes like, before understanding it, I think it becomes a core. So what I wanted to think about is that, what if this was not part of your identity? What if this person was not in your life? What if this profession was not your profession? What if you were not Black or white or brown or Hispanic or Native American or, anything? And if that was not your primary identity, so we're just going to do a counterfactual kind of a thought experiment to look at who would you be without that? Right. And so I'm going to put everybody in breakout rooms in small groups, so we have a chance to discuss this, share this experience. And I always like to have some opportunities to connect between people in these. And then we'll, come back in about 10 minutes. And if you have any questions, please post them on the chat. And so we can have a more free-flowing discussions afterwards. All right. Okay. Open all rooms so you can go, select and you can go. Okay.
Awesome.
Hi.
Actually, everybody went to the room for the
Okay,
first
good.
time without
That's
saying anything.
that's fine. So anyway, so good to see you, man. How are you?
Lada, it's really bad. When I lost a friend to COVID, and I got
Please,
like,
I totally understand. I lost 3 family members.
yeah, I lost my cool. I was like, yeah,
I'm so sorry. No, this is like so shitty. Like I've had like my family has had like extended family. Like I lost 2 of my cousins and one of my sister-in-law, but she's pretty close to me, her father. It's all in 10 days. And then
yeah,
how to keep my mother from not, and one of the cousins that died, actually, my mother is like his mother because he, you know, he's older than me, but he grew up in my house and he, you know, he got married in my house. So, you know, so it's just like, it's really bad. It's very bad. But before I forget,
yeah,
like, let's look at what, like we'll give them 10, 12 minutes. And
yeah.
so Saturday, are you and Geetanjali both vaccinated fully?
My vaccination is on Sunday, Monday, but I think
Okay.
it's fine.
No. I was going to say, like, if you want to, I wanted to invite you both to lunch on Sunday, but
Oh,
I don't want to be indoors without, you know, with fully, you know what I mean? Like, we can
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
outdoors in the park, right? We can definitely do that. But in terms of having
So, Lada, when are you going back?
on May 17th. So you finish your semester and then we can meet the
Yeah.
following
So,
weekend.
yeah, we can plan maybe like 15 or something. That time I will be vaccinated also completely.
Yeah. No. The thing is, like, I have my niece who's in Colombia, right? So I've asked her, like, because she's like, obviously, like, she's like, I
Yeah.
want some rasam and all this. I said, okay. So she's coming on Sunday. So I thought I would invite Nidhi because Nidhi and I will
Oh,
done
nice.
working together. And I think you would enjoy meeting her, actually.
Of course, I would. Okay, then let's
She's
do
an
it Sunday.
economist. She works with Poverty Action Lab, and she used to work in Poverty Action Lab with MIT before she started her pre-doctoral fellowship in Colombia. So we'll definitely make sure that you see her again before we leave. I think it's a good connection too, because she's actually very influential, even though she's very young, because she worked with people in MIT and Harvard and everything. So in this, behavioral economics group. So I think it'll be a good connection for you too. But anyway, so how do you think this is going?
This is going good. Like, I think everybody is, like, staying and listening.
Okay.
I think it's going good. So yeah, Lada. So
yeah.
So are you planning this weekend, or what's your plan?
This
for the meetup?
I'm saying that we'll definitely see each other. Why don't you finish your semester?
Yeah.
So it's also a busy time, right?
Yeah, by Monday I will be kind of done. Then I think I will do the your paper, and I think that's the last one. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, and did you see, like, Renee is going to be on?
I was about to say that. That's a wonderful news, and I was like, I know her from somewhere.
She's a nice person. Now I'm always very stressed about like, I thought, like, when we looked at Dwight first, like, everybody said, like, it was like, my contract with her also has been limited. And I think also that Dwight may have been, like, really a great president in a place that there had no resource issues. Right? Because resources mask a lot of they
Yeah.
buffered
Yeah.
a lot of problems.
No, this is really good news. Renee coming into new school.
Yeah. Oh, okay. We can. All right. So we have like 2 more minutes.
Yeah, let's
And
go.
then we'll ask them to do like we'll ask them to put it on the chat
Okay.
instead of having one group talk. It's 10 groups.
Yeah.
Because I wanted like not to have 5 people in a group, then they don't have enough time to talk.
Yeah, I think all the groups only have 2-3 people,
Okay.
or 4 is the
Yeah, no, I
maximum.
know, but what I'm saying is that we cannot have each group report out.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask them to just put it on the chat, saying like, if you want to like sum up what your,
Yeah, I just broadcasted last minute to all the groups.
Okay.
We can call back when you want.
No, we can have another minute or two. We have 15 minutes, but yeah. No, but I think it took a little bit, but I think it was a good, even though the introductions took a little bit longer. And but I think people got into the meat of different things.
Yeah.
That was, I think, good. And all right. Oh, it's only 18 seconds. It's going to ask us like.
So, yeah, I think we can close.
No, we don't need to close it right now.
Oh, it's automated. Okay.
It's automated. No, it says like 7 minutes for the breakout room. Do you want to close? We'll close. Okay, that gives them 30 seconds or 60 seconds warning. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, they think you're only 15 seconds.
15 seconds.
Jeez.
Yeah, but I think it's fine.
All right. So, given the time, it'd be great if people want to share on the chat what the experience was. I find it very disorienting. It's like, I don't know who I am all of a sudden. And it's very difficult to other the person, people that you don't share some things if we are not us. And so if you can just like put it in the chat, and then I see there are questions. We can. So one of the interesting questions is that in the pharma example, is the dilution of values of the indigenous people. What are the long-term implications, and are we making the indigenous people capitalists? There are, I absolutely, I think it's a very, yes, there is, yeah, so that's a very important question. And like I said, I think, from what I have looked at is that unless the community or the organization has the financial power to take people to court and get it stopped, that has happened. And so I actually have another paper on like the different activist strategies in this space. Like, some of them tried to co-opt the primary law and say like, okay, I will take them to international courts. And some of them, basically cooperate, like communities that have actually gotten into profit sharing arrangements for their designs or their intellectual property and things like that. And so what I find is it's a combination of actually different kind of resources, cultural resources, financial resources, right? Because you need, if you're going to take Pfizer to court, Pfizer's become a straw man, but any company, you need money, and you need enough people with resources to be able to actually devote time. For example, and sometimes, like I said, like you have to co-opt the system, which is what some of the things like, for example, like basmati rice did that. They used like the Champagne model of geographical indicators that nobody else can call it basmati rice until it was grown in the foothills of Himalayas. So they literally co-opted the mainstream WIPO, classification for it. So absolutely, this is a very important question. And I have actually honestly no answers, but it's, that's my biggest fear too, is that the only way to actually protect and secure communities' intellectual property is to actually engage in capitalistic practice? I think it's an important question. And again, I think the only way they can actually, like for instance, like the copyleft movement and the open source movement in the software gives like a really great example of making the communal resources in the kind of modern world, even like Elon Musk with Tesla, who's released all the designs for IP, so that's again like a model of releasing it into the communal space, which makes it collectively owned that anybody can use it, but that doesn't still give the original ownership credit. And I think that is the real challenge. So which means like somebody can start a yoga studio after 6 weeks of classes. And, so that's the real challenge. And it's an important question. And I think I do agree that, Tesla example is self-serving. Absolutely, that it's an important question. And it's something that I think most of us who are working in the space with IP and collective knowledge are like really struggling with on how to do this. And so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Carter, who is going to facilitate a discussion where we can hear from our students about how they actually apply this in their professional and personal lives.
Yeah, thanks, Latha. And we only have a little bit of time left, but I did want to make sure to hear that we could hear from the students who joined us, specifically around how they use some type of practice in their work. So I guess I'll start with Pernilla, who I don't see on my screen, but I assume is still here. There she is.
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes,
Hi.
so I wanted kind of to share one way to do mindfulness that perhaps you associate mindfulness with doing introspective exercises. And that's a lot with the Western culture. And we were talking about how some use it to just think of yourself and you kind of do introspective work. One thing that I like about mindfulness practices and something I use is that I like to ground myself to where I'm at and interact with objects around me. So I'm a design student, I'm a strategy student, and something I apply is thinking about what the process of the objects that are around me that I interact with, who are the people that if you were to draw out the map of how a product has come into my hands, where has it been before me, where is it going afterwards, who are the people within that process who have managed to get the product where I am today, and seeing that supply chain of people and processes. And it gives me an interconnectedness, and it's a very visual way to, even on a communal scale, if you're working on a project in a team, in an organization, to really emphasize empathy and putting people into the products. So that is one practice that I take with me and use in my professional life.
Thanks. I think the speed at which we oftentimes design, where we forget to take the time to think about that chain of ownership and all of the various places and people our products and materials have touched, yet that's such a huge impact on the work. And Jamie, who I have just learned, even though we've been in class for a while, is a recovering thespian as well. How do you actually, like, what types of practices do you use in your work?
Yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit about how I use it with the team that I work with. Basically, you can be mindful of yourself, but you can also be mindful of how somebody else is coming into a space. So that's something that I've done. I've even done some of the exercises from our class with staff members on our team. And so I think that you can use mindfulness to also be aware of the people you're working with, and that it can help develop tolerance, which is also very important for, you know, social justice, and for working with a team and creating, you know, the community that you need to get something done. You want me to keep going? Because that was
No, thanks. Well, we can come back. We can come back. I want to get everyone's voice in real quick. So Genesis.
I think I'll start like first personally. So personally, when like pre-COVID, when I would be out in the field, and I did a little bit of like housing organizing in public housing in NYCHA, I would get invited into people's homes, and it's a lot of like taxing work, right? To like really be in someone's space who's really living in a space that is hindering, right, their health and well-being. And so after really long days of just going in and out of like apartments, I felt like super, super overwhelmed. And so I would go home and I would do like the exercise of the senses, just because I just felt super overstimulated by everything, and just all the different like personal conversations with all the different community members. So I love doing that practice of just sitting down and just like, what am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I tasting? And kind of do like a countdown. And I think that helps just ground me. And then with like my current, like the young people that I'm currently working with, we always start like with a breathing exercise before we just open any kind of like popular education lesson that we're gonna commence. Just because, you know, I feel so bad for young people right now because everything is online for them, especially like in high school. And so it's just like a way for them to like close their eyes and not like look at a screen for a couple of minutes. And so that's been helpful, I think, for them to open up our space. And then also when we close our space, ending with like a breathing exercise and expressing gratitude for everyone being together, even if it is digitally through Zoom.
How have you found that process to change in Zoom? Like, what does it look like online when you're helping others to do the breathing exercise?
I think in the beginning, especially with young people, they're like kind of embarrassed and they're like, why are we doing this? And so they might like turn off their cameras. But I think seeing me do it and like just being very much like comfortable in my seat, I think it's opened them up to the possibilities of doing it. And I've realized that once I started incorporating that, like people weren't like snappy. I think, you know, and I think that happens a lot, especially like teenagers are just going through a lot right now. but like just having them ground themselves in the moment and not think about like, you know, an SAT or like graduation, like just really being in the moment. I think that it's changed like our dynamic online. And I think it's helped us when we do get to meet in person, like socially distanced, and feel a little bit more connected. Because I've never met a lot of them. Like it was only like through a computer screen. So I think it's been helpful in our transition of like getting to know each other.
Yeah, it's super weird not having met them in person, but I think that there are students who are very receptive to it because they are feeling anxiety and disconnection. So thanks. And lastly, just to get Vicky in. Hi, Vicky.
Hi. As I mentioned, I've been journaling and using that as a way to be more reflective. And also in Latha's class, we did the Corn Ferry survey, and we got 360-degree feedback from people who we interact with. And that was hugely illuminating as well. Like in my case, I learned that I'm weak with pattern recognition. So I've been trying to work a little bit on pattern recognition, just improving it just as a skill. And lastly, I would just say that I mean, to me, I look at meditation as a renewal. And I feel like the Zoom environment that we're all in right now, and COVID this last year in particular, it's taken a lot out of like all of us. And I feel like we need to renew, like all of us need to renew and, you know, give ourselves like that love and renew so that we can be fresh and look at problems with fresh eyes.
That's excellent. Thanks. So, Latha, I'm going to hand it back over to you now, if that's all right.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so, you know, this obviously we can continue this conversation for the next 4 hours. There is so much to unpack and, you know, learn from each other. But I do want to thank everybody and you know, who joined us today from different parts of the world. And I do, and particularly thank you so much, Carter, he's one of my favorite people on New School campus, for, you know, being part of this really fun adventure and trying to something interesting. And the students, I mean, this is like the first thing that even with my book is that I've had the good fortune of thousands of students from different, you know, both in terms of academic and corporate organizational contexts who've been willing to extend and stretch and try different things with me that helped me refine this more and more. And thank you so much, Ram. Ram is, you know, he also wrote very kindly, they wrote the foreword in my book for, you know, for the book, which I'm really deeply grateful, and for showing up and just doing the work that you do. And thank you everybody for the repeat attendees who've been coming back for several events. I appreciate your support and engagement. And the next year is going to be even more kind of power-packed in some ways, because I'm actually bringing in co-hosting institutions, because I don't want this to be just one institution. It's a community that we are building. So we are also going to be bringing in other institutions that are co-hosting the event. So I hope to see some of you and in those events as well. You know, if you have an idea for a chapter in my book, please submit, you know, a proposal for it. And thank you very much for joining, everybody, and in solidarity and mindfulness. Thanks for the whole year, and have a wonderful summer, and find some time to take care of yourself. So thanks, everybody.